Welcome to Dear Marketers, produced by MKT1 and Caspian Studios in partnership with Typeform. This is a show where me and some of my closest marketing friends answer questions from you. I'm here with Devon and Grace today. You met them in episode 1 and episode 2. All three of us worked together 2 times at Asana and Carta, so we all have a lot of the same experiences, so this might be the most boring podcast we do because we're basically the same person at this point. Not at all. Grace, since we last spoke, has now been promoted, and she is now the VP of Revenue at Cocoon. A big congrats to Grace.
Congrats, Grace.
Devon is still, she's only been in a job for a couple of weeks, so it's a good thing she's still there at Mercury leading all of product marketing. So today, I'm really excited. We're talking about teams, so it's very appropriate that the people here I have interviewed and hired at 2 companies, and then they've helped me build teams there, and they've built teams in their own right. Both have built early stage teams and been a participant in building large teams at larger companies. Across the board, all stages, we've done it. Let's go to Typeform for today's question.
Dear marketers, I'm Branka, VP of Marketing at Glide. I've hired hundreds of people in my career, and it's still very tough. How do you hire a great team? Thank you.
Thanks to Branka for asking this question. So what's interesting here about Branka's question about building teams is that she's done this before. She said she's hired, I think, 100 people before. She's at a company called Glide now, which has a fairly sizable team for building no-code apps. And so she's done this, but she's still saying it's hard. So I think the lesson here, at least my quick takeaway, is that even after all this advice and even after hiring 1 million people, it's still going to be impossible. So maybe just don't even try. No, that's not true. I mean, I think you can get a lot better over time at it, but I think it's always still going to be difficult because it's always difficult to figure out how different people are going to fit in and what's the best skill set, and what you need is an ever-changing target. So it's always difficult. But Grace, Devon, quick reactions, quick takes before we give her a deeper answer.
Yeah, I think my initial reaction is like, when maybe hot take, years of experience or directly relevant experience is sort of overrated. And I think what's important about interviewing and hiring is understanding how people think and how they approach problems.
Yeah, I think, can they solve a problem, and can they and will they teach themselves something new over and over and over again? I think especially early stage, what you're doing in terms of your marketing today could look really different in 3 months, in 6 months, in 12 months. And you want a team that's going to keep growing and adapting. And just because they haven't done it before doesn't mean they can't learn it.
I don't think that's limited to early stage, though. Even at late stage, priorities can change really quickly, or you can be adding in another go-to-market motion, or adding in another product line, or adding in a new audience. So things can change just maybe in slightly different ways. And so things are always ever changing, and marketing's ever changing, especially in the last couple of years. So I think, again, the target for who you hire is always sort of a moving target.
Yeah, it's hard. And someone, even if someone's resume looks perfect, they still might not be the right fit for the role, which I think is what makes it even harder.
I think that's a better point than any of the ones I've made so far, is that interviewing is necessary. And potentially some sort of assignment or really getting a feel for the person and spending a lot of time with the person is really necessary. And maybe we should define what it means to hire a great team for Branka and everyone listening. I think there's also before you do the interviewing, before you do the hiring, I think a big part of this is scoping the role. And then I think there's also just the interviewing itself. I think it's also important to note that great hiring doesn't stop when you make an offer and it gets accepted. Onboarding and supporting your team throughout is really important, but that is 5 other podcasts. So I think we should, if you both agree, I think we should keep this from scoping the role and figuring out you need someone to interviewing people and bringing them onto a team of varying sizes. Does that seem like a good purview for what we're going to talk about today?
Yep.
Good by me.
Sounds great.
Thanks to our partner Typeform, which has been my go-to form builder for years. So of course, to submit a question for us to answer here on Dear Marketers, we have a branded Typeform, not a dull traditional form. You can find the Typeform link to submit a question for the show in the show notes, and you can use Typeform at your company too. Use it to collect leads, feedback, research, and even to ask questions while onboarding team members. There are templates to help you get started, they have video forms, and you can use code MKT1 to get 20% off their annual growth plan. What does it mean to build a great team?
I think the key to emphasize is the team aspect, I mean, like Devon was saying, if right, someone could be perfect on paper, but not the right person for the role. And I think that's really true when you're thinking about a whole team of people. If you are the greatest marketer in the world and you have 5 of you, you're going to have a pretty bad team because they're not going to complement each other, even though you've hired 5 of what you perceive to be the greatest marketer in the world.
I would take 5 of you on a team of 5. You're pretty
my
but
God.
Grace is really well rounded. So there's that.
Stop.
Devon, 2 or 3 of
Yeah,
us.
yeah. Thanks.
No, but even I, greatest marketer in the world, most well-rounded.
Most
Need-
graceful.
Most graceful. The most grace marketer still needs people to balance out, right? Like people that can, so right, I'm like a big ideas sometimes all over the place person, so it's helpful for me to have people that like bring that down to earth and are execution focused people. For example, right, I can do the execution, but other people are a lot better at that, like how do we get work done piece. And so making sure that like a great team is great because of how they complement each other and work together, not because they're all individually great.
Beautiful.
Yeah, I often say it's like playing Tetris. You know, you have to fit the, or like doing a puzzle, I guess, but Tetris is more fun because there's like the real time, you know,
Legos?
the speed aspect. You have to fit, you know,
I guess
yeah,
it's not
fit
really
the right
like
pieces
Legos,
together.
though.
Oh yeah.
No, it's not like Legos because Legos has like a predefined situation. Legos are too easy to fit together.
Yeah, you can. Yes.
Tetris analogy might not quite work either, but it's
No.
yeah. There's like they come in different
Contained.
shapes and sizes, and you have to fit them together in a way that makes the most sense.
Remember those 3D puzzles from the 90s, like the foam ones? I never actually did one of those.
Oh, my family loved those. We had a Big Ben one. We had one that was a globe. That was really hard. You had to do the
Ooh, a
underside.
globe. Wow, advanced. This seems like the time to tell everyone that I do own a puzzle table. Like it's a table that goes on top of a table that has drawers. You can put the pieces in and like move it around. Like that's, so I really like puzzles. So let's stick with the puzzle analogy. So, okay, it's a puzzle, and I think the puzzle is ever changing. What I like to say, so there's a domino aspect in here too. People are going to be so confused.
So many games.
Devon, try to summarize what we're saying about all of these games because I am stuck.
I think it's that the net is that you can't think of each role in isolation. You have to think about the skills and qualities that you have on the team and build the rest of the team somewhat keeping that in mind and, of course, the business needs in mind.
So I always say that making hiring plans is kind of a fool's errand because you have this list of people that you need, but then you might hire someone that has a different shape. So I like to talk a lot about like the shape of people's skill sets. I tend to say in marketing, you want someone that has a pi 3.14. We're talking about the symbol, a pi symbol, which has 2 spikes in 2 areas, not a T shape, which only has 1 spike. So in marketing, there's so many
Actually,
subfunctions. It's
I
helpful
can help here, guys.
early on. Oh
I
my
have this
God.
pie mug.
God.
If you're
Yeah.
listening to the audio only, Devon,
Unbelievable.
I didn't
Quick
even
switch
have the
to the
pie
video.
shape thing in the notes. Just popped
Pie
out
mug.
a pie
A math
symbol
magician
mug.
through and through.
Math magician. Holy shit.
That
Actually, I've
was
always said I'm not a mathematician,
unbelievable.
but-
Did you
Yeah.
plan that for this recording?
It's
I
not in the
didn't.
notes. It is not in the notes. I didn't put the pie shape thing. That framework was just so ingrained in me that I didn't even need it in the notes that we had. All right, we're still on the first question. The point is that early on the team, you should hire pie-shaped marketers, people that spike in 2 areas and have breadth across the team. But as the team scales, it starts to become more normal to hire specialists or people that have T-shaped skill sets. Does anyone have an object with a T on it? Probably not right now, but we do know what they look like, so we should be fine. So all that's to say is you're filling in a puzzle. It's changing over time. Someone that might be a great candidate today might not be a great candidate tomorrow. And that's what we're talking about with great teams. Before we jump into scoping the role and talking about the interview process, I would be remiss to not mention the second framework of the day. So the first framework is early on, it's really helpful to hire pie-shaped marketers. The second framework of the day is that building a marketing team is more like building a product team than a sales team. And by a product team, I mean product engineering and design. So hiring sales teams, what happens when you hire sales teams?
You're hiring a bunch of the same role. basically. I mean, same with, right, a CS team in many cases, especially earlier on. Same with something like a support team, right? You could copy and paste your job description for 5 hires in a row, theoretically, on teams like that, because people are operating in their role more on their own. And so it doesn't have that same Tetris effect of trying to fit the individual pieces and complements together. And individual marketers, like, marketing is not one shape of person at all. There are pie shapes and there are T shapes, and there are also probably all sorts of other shapes
Rectangles.
too. Rectangles, quadrilaterals is just also a rectangle.
People the shape of Idaho. I don't know. I'm just thinking that's weird.
A heart-shaped
Right, but I
marketer.
think there's so many specializations within the broad category of marketing that doesn't exist in the same way on, say, like a sales team or a customer success team.
This doesn't mean that salespeople aren't multidimensional, 3D puzzle-shaped humans. It just means that the role is a little bit more specialist-focused than the average marketing role. And in marketing, you have lots of sub-functions. So, Devon, do you think that's like product?
Yeah, I mean, I think the other big difference is like a sales role is very well defined, right? And sort of every salesperson you add adds a predictable amount of like incremental value to the business, right? They can carry a book of business of a certain size. Yes, hopefully, exactly. Hopefully predictable, hopefully impactful. Whereas marketing, I think, is much more like product in that there's a lot of ambiguous problems to be solved. It's not necessarily clear exactly what to do next. And so marketers have to think a little bit more like product managers, which is like, let's do some discovery. Let's figure out what we're actually trying to do here, who we're talking to, what the story is. And so I think in that way, it's a lot more similar to a product tech role than a
And then
sales
to
role.
like tease out this analogy more, I often say like, there's a few other things. So to this framework, you're going to hire technical people on the product team as engineers. You're going to hire potentially analysts, data types. You're going to hire designers and creatives. And so this is very similar to a well-rounded marketing team. Marketing's not just hiring a bunch of demand gen or growth marketing teams, even though some people think that it is. But sales is really laser focused on a single KPI, which is quarterly revenue. Whereas product and marketing are not. They're focused on short-term revenue. Of course, they're also thinking long-term. They're thinking about big bets that can change the trajectory of the company. Marketing is building a product itself. I consider the brand and all the content and the fuel that you create a product. So there's even more similarities here. So often when founders or other executives in the company are kind of or even recruiters are really confused about marketing hiring and wondering why you're not copy and pasting the job description. You're like, oh, it's like hiring engineering, product, and design, and kind of like a light bulb goes off typically. And so I find that analogy super useful. I make it all the time. It's one of my go-tos.
Agreed. I think it's a great point.
All right, so I think we've talked a lot about how hiring changes as you scale, or we've talked a little about hiring changes as you scale, and just how early on it really makes sense to hire generalists, maybe bring in contractors and agencies as specialists. Just like any like additional things that haven't been said on just what else differs as you scale, because I know both of you have worked anywhere from like seed through Series F, G, Z, who knows.
One thing I think is important as the company grows, and this is not meant to be antithetical to what we were just saying, but keep in mind the structure of the rest of the business too. So on product marketing in particular, look at the structure of the product team and think about how to build out the product marketing function to kind of support that, not necessarily mirror it, but to make sure that those teams are well supported by your team. And similarly, actually look at the structure of the sales team too, right? Even though you're not hiring marketers like you would hire salespeople, it's important to understand how they think about different audience segments, how they, run that side of the business, basically, to make sure, again, you're building a marketing team that supports these partner teams really effectively.
Not to have like a total derailment, but that's kind of the point of Dear Marketers, is that we do kind of have a lot of derailments. Yeah.
Total
It's just
derailment?
real conversation. I love a total derailment.
20
But,
minutes in talking about the first bullet point, a derailment?
I don't know. It doesn't. Okay. what was the derailment? My derailment here is that, do you think that product marketing teams, when you're building that out, should be organized exactly like the product team? Does that make for a better product marketing team when it's matched? Like, for instance,
No.
they're
Like a
organized
one-to-one?
around these themes and these pillars. Should it be like that?
Not necessarily. I really think, like many things, it depends on the company. I do think it's important for PMMs to have very strong relationships with PMs. And I think that having PMs have sort of a point person that they can go to on the product marketing team is important for that reason. Otherwise, I think if they don't know who to go to, they often just don't come to marketing at all, which is probably the worst case scenario in terms of, getting our insights into product development and go to market and all of that. But I don't think you have to structure it exactly like the product team. And in fact, I think if you do that, sometimes you miss some of the nuances of how the sales team thinks about the market or partnerships or, other areas basically that kind of need attention and focus, but that product teams aren't necessarily organizing around.
Selfishly for me, Devon, because I'm thinking about my own product marketing team and you're the expert. How do you think about, like, when you are hiring more product marketers, how do you think about, like, dividing up their work, for instance, by audience or by product line or by prospects versus existing customers? Like, how do you think about who does what and why?
I typically don't think about prospects versus existing customers or really like a breakdown across the funnel. I think product marketers have to really own that product or audience, and I'll talk about that in a second, really end to end, right? Think of them as like the CMO for that product or that audience, right? They should be really thinking about the full funnel, thinking about customers and non-customers, and really like understanding the go-to-market life cycle essentially that they're owning. Whether it's products or audiences, I think is always a tricky question, right? And this is, again, do you kind of model around how the sales team is structured, which is probably going to be an audience focus of some sort, or more around how the product team is structured. Actually, at Mercury right now, we have both. So we have PMMs that are aligned to broader product areas. We definitely do not have a one-to-one PM to PMM situation, but they, oversee a broader product area and are aligned to a bunch of PMs. And then we also have a team that's focused, especially for us, on new audiences. So now we're trying to do some audience expansion and acquire customers from more different types of segments than our sort of traditional ICP. And so we have PMMs actually assigned, kind of to each of those new segments that are also running sort of the outbound go-to-market part of those things.
I think what's interesting here, I guess the 3D puzzle is the theme of this, but there are so many ways to structure the team. There's so many dimensions by which to organize a team. Whether on product marketing, we could have the same conversation on growth marketing, and maybe we'll do future episodes like on these specific things. Content can also be confusing. What exactly does it own? What does it mean? How do you think about it? So for all of these teams, there's so many different ways to organize. And I think something that we all did at Asana when we were there, that the company did, was something called AORs, which is areas of responsibility. And maybe at Asana, truth be told, we took this a little far because there wasn't a lot of structure otherwise, but this paired with some clear org charts and clear relationships works super well, where it's what do people own. So you could own, as a product marketer, I like to use animals as my ICP example. So you could own the dog ICP, and you could also own sales enablement. So you own dogs and sales enablement. Those are apples and oranges. Wow, mixing metaphors. Or you could own the Jenga product line and also the launch process, right? You can mix and match, but just be clear about who owns what and have clear go-to. So a lot of this, like, I love the AORs thing when used alongside clear org charts and things like that. And so we just used to have a list in Asana of like all of the different areas. And then when new people would join, you could give some away or break some down. And I won't go too much into AORs. I would say this isn't a Kramer work. This is an Asana work, but it's something that I do like and do recommend as team scale.
Yeah, we use AORs on Cocoon marketing. We haven't expanded it to the rest of go-to-market or the rest of the company, but marketing uses AORs.
Well, people often ask me this question, like, hey, you're telling me to get pretty organized, Kramer. And like you're telling me to do OKRs and then to have milestones and
So many frameworks.
so many frameworks. You don't have to use all of them, pick and choose. But the point is you're telling me to do all these things and the rest of my company isn't doing any of this. If the rest of the company isn't doing AORs or isn't thinking about hiring plans in the same way you are, that's okay. Like you need to fit into the company process and not just be like a renegade doing your own thing. But you need that organization because all the roles are different, because all the skill sets are different, because there's so many different things you can prioritize and do. So if the rest of the company isn't doing AORs, fine. Do it on marketing, super useful. So I think that goes for lots of things.
And I do think to the point of being a great team, right? How do you build a great team? If you believe strongly that doing something like having AORs or having a certain hiring process or using OKRs, because the rest of the company doesn't yet, is essential to you having a great team. Like as the marketing leader, you should move forward with that with conviction. And when you're doing it well, you're going to bring the rest of the company with you. Right? Just because the rest of the company isn't doing something, if you're like, God, I really need a process for this or this thing sucks, just do it yourself. And then you're going to do a lot better job of starting to influence the broader company on the impact of marketing when you can show that how marketing works, not just the work marketing does, but how marketing works is exceptional. That's when you start getting brought in on more strategic conversations about the business because people see that this org is the best one at the company and the best one in the world, which is a standing marketing objective at Cocoon, which it doesn't go in the company OKRs. It's our own personal
sounds like maybe it shouldn't.
Which is be the best team in the world.
Wow, Grace.
And every quarter we do have things that contribute to being the best team in the world. Sometimes it's offsites. Sometimes it's mentorship, but legitimately we talk consistently about being the best team.
I love that.
You know, I don't know how I feel about that objective. It's a high bar, but if it works for your team and makes your team great.
We're supposed to set ambitious goals.
I think it's just that Kramer
Go back to the goal setting one. Ambitious
will be upset
goals.
if any other marketing leader in the world builds the best team in the world and it's not her. I think that's the issue. To tie this back to hiring, I'm going to try to get us back on track here. The best people want to work on great teams that make a big impact. And a great way to show that your team is strong and makes a big impact is to be organized and have clear goals and prioritize well. So I think all of the organization stuff and the OKRs and the AORs, they're not just acronyms, right? They're ways to actually build a high-performing team. And then that helps you hire because you can point to all of the ways in which your team is killing it and they want to be on a team that's killing it.
I think it also is worth mentioning, though. We're talking a lot about the organization and making sure everyone has clear roles and all of this stuff. Across the board, one of the things I'm always looking for when hiring, really no matter the stage, because of the ever-changingness of marketing and companies and all of these things within startups, is that you also got to be scrappy. And even if there isn't a process or organization, you got to be able to get it done. So I don't think any of us are saying like organization is the only way and define process and get so rigid on it. And I think with marketing hiring, this is especially true. Like I like to always be willing and ready to make an exception or an opportunistic hire or hire someone that, you
never would have hired me twice.
Honestly, Grace didn't fit into the box or the, well, I think originally when I hired Grace at Asana in a more ads focused, paid role, performance marketing, whatever term you want to use, that was more like fitting in a shape. But when I hired her at Carta, like there was no shape. Don't tell anyone. It was just like, you are scrappy, can handle big projects, can handle creative ideas. We need more of that. We need more scrappiness on the team, but also we need more big bets on the team. We need someone who can come in and handle those big campaigns, can handle some of these creative projects and, help me do that and help me manage these things. So she didn't 100% fit in the box and was, very kind of opportunistic, but critical on the team. And so you got to be ready and willing to do that.
This is why, again, I think, resume is overrated more or less. And that what you really want to understand is like,
say it again. Say it again. Really soundbitey, Devon.
Resumes are overrated.
You heard it here first. So so dumb.
No, but I think what you really want to get at is, do they have experience managing ambiguous projects and
Ooh.
influencing others to get stuff done? Because that is so important at startup, at growth stage, really at any company I've been at. And like you said, I've been at tech companies of varying sizes. And that is a consistent thing, is that folks need to be able to manage, ambiguous problems, ambiguous projects, and bring clarity and just like drive progress and outcomes.
This is a great segue, I think, to talking about interviewing and talking about how you do it, how you set up the interview process. It's a great segue because I like that question. Not when have you managed ambiguous projects, because that's a little too vague, but one of my favorite interview questions that I pretty much always ask, it's actually usually like my phone screen first interview question, which is just walk me through a project, campaign, initiative, pick your favorite word. Walk me through a project that you've done from start to finish. I want to see how someone structures it. I want to see if they tell me the goal. I want to see if they tell me the audience. I want to see if they go through all of these things and really tell me about it at the right altitude, and then leave an opportunity for me to dive in deeper and ask them more questions. And so I'm asking this somewhat clear question, but also leaving lots of room to see how they're thinking, how they structure it, and what they choose. So that's one of my favorites. But yeah, talk to me just about your interview processes or the interview process you think works best for hiring marketers. Do you like assignments? Do you make scorecards? How do you think about it?
Yeah, this is very relevant for me. I'm working on a rec and a scorecard right now. I'm about to open up a role on my team. I am pro scorecards. I think having clarity up front about what are kind of the skills and attributes and qualities that you're looking for helps, with consistency in the process. When you're comparing candidates, if you have a few finalists, it can really help you just like hone in on what do we actually really need here and who's spiking in those particular areas. It helps reduce bias. It as a guideline for other interviewers. Often with marketing roles, you're going to have cross-functional interviewers on the panel, someone from product, someone from sales, RevOps, whatever it might be. You want those folks to have, some guidelines and parameters for what they're assessing for. So big fan of scorecards. Assignments is a hot topic, I think. I'm pro
It is a hot
assignment,
topic.
but I know Grace is anti, so let's throw down, Grace.
Oh, anti-assignment. Take it, Grace.
Yeah, okay, so I'm anti-assignment for a few reasons. One, I don't think people necessarily do this intentionally, but there's a lot of opportunity to cheat. Either in that if you say, please spend 2 hours on this, and candidate A spends 2 hours like you asked, and candidate B spends 8 hours and says
16 hours, a whole
16
week.
hours, right? Yeah. Like, how am I supposed to know how much time you actually spent on it? How am I supposed to know if you sent it to your old boss for feedback? I've definitely never done that before, right? Like, never done that.
I've definitely never received someone being like, hey, Kramer, can you look at this and given guidance?
Right.
Never.
Never.
And
is that cheating though, or is that using your resources?
Well, yeah, but then when you think about like, okay, equity in the hiring process, if one person is currently unemployed and their whole job is interviewing for jobs, and another person has a full-time job, has kids and pets and
full teams of people at their house,
full teams of living things to care for, right? Like, that's not an even playing field for people, let alone getting into paying people, et cetera.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. It gets into, do you need to be paid for your time? It gets into all of these issues, which let's not tackle, but there's a lot of issues. Yeah.
Yeah, and so my preference is to do a live workshop where people get rough guidance on what you're going to be doing in person, but they don't get the full question, so they can't actually prepare. We say, for instance, with the growth marketer rec that we did a lot of workshops for, because dang, that was hard for people to do well in. We basically said we're going to talk about a growth problem the business is currently facing. It's, these 3 people in the room run the meeting, basically.
Ooh.
Yeah, nice.
And then you can judge influence, how they approach problems, etc., all at once. And it's
do you give pre-reads for that, or not just pre-reads, but like pre-maths? Do you ever give data in advance? How do you? Pre-maths is hard to say.
I
No.
give
Okay.
they're allowed to ask the recruiter questions, but the recruiter doesn't understand the case because the recruiter's a recruiter and not a marketer. And so they're not giving, tons of information, but they know it's
Right.
going to they would know it's going to be, we're talking about a product launch, or we're talking about a problem in our funnel, or we're talking about, a problem with the sales handoff, maybe, for example. So they might get
Yep.
that kind of vague, but then we'd use live data in the conversation to set it up.
Here's the thing. I love here's the thing. That's like what I say when I'm about to disagree with you. I say, here's the thing. Code word. Here's the thing. No, I agree with you, but I also disagree with you. I agree that workshops, live, working sessions, I used to call them whiteboarding sessions. They're not so much anymore, although I do have a whiteboarder over there, are great. And I think they're especially great for leadership roles and senior roles to see how people think and also how people are going to show up in cross-functional meetings or show up if they have to lead a team meeting and do the big thinking as well as be able to get in there on details. But I do think that I have learned so many times or been surprised, but not surprised because it happens all the time, but surprised by a candidate who I think is just crushing the interviews and even the whiteboarding session when I actually see them dive into the data, dive into a spreadsheet, write words, the very practical stuff. And I have never figured out a way to test for that other than, hey, do it. And so one thing that you can do to mix this, especially for more junior mid-level roles in the weeds. Yes, you can get writing samples, but you never know who did those. Yes, you can ask them about metrics in the past, but there's something really just valuable about saying, here's a data set. Maybe it's fake numbers. Based on this data, what would you do? Or review this data before you come in and we'll talk about it and talk about campaigns or plans, or based on this data, what would you do first as a growth marketing lead? So I kind of like the pre stuff because look, you're not going to spend, if you're given a spreadsheet with some data, could you spend 24 hours deep in there? And yes, but it's kind of a finite thing where you're going to spend a couple hours looking at it. So I like that stuff. On the writing stuff, I'm interested on Devon's take on this.
I think what I do like having someone give me something in writing, though, even not necessarily for writing roles. I think it really helps me understand, again, how they think, how they structure their thoughts, and whether they are a structured thinker, and then how they communicate asynchronously, which is super important. Yes, you're going to be in a lot of meetings with these people, and you're going to, they are going to need to think on their feet, but so much of the work my team does is we start a doc and we propose something, or we break down a problem, in writing, and sort of discuss asynchronously. So that's why I think it's really important. I do, however, have a few rules of thumb. One is tell them not to spend more than 2 hours on it. I agree some people will, but don't ask people to spend 8 hours on an assignment.
Do you say, because I've done this in the past, I've experimented.
Right, only send it with that much time.
Tell us when you're going to have time to do it, and we'll send it to you that morning. You send it back to us at the end of the day.
I've done that before. I think that can be helpful. We don't currently do that right now. We just kind of hope that we can trust people. But that, I actually try not to make it directly relevant to the business. I think partly because of the issue of, do you pay people for the work, and does it feel like something
it's a live
you could
session.
use? Right. What we
that's
do,
the thing about a live session. Yeah.
Right. So what we do is we give a prompt. It's not related to Mercury. It's sort of as far away from our business as possible, actually, to make people kind of think from first principles and not give an advantage to anyone who has industry expertise. But then we do have a live session with them as well. So we don't have them just submit it, we review it and say yes or no, and they sort of never get a chance to speak to it. We also spend 45 minutes with them going through it. We read it in advance. Usually there's 2 of us on these assignment reviews. And then we come prepared with some questions for them. They can kind of speak to their thinking and answer our questions. And that's where I think we see the thinking on your feet. What would it be like to be in a meeting with you?
I'm realizing we could have done a whole podcast on should you do interview assignments? Nobody sent in the question, but had they, our Typeform is open and available for you to send in questions. So if you want us to ask that, send it in. So I think what's interesting here is very mixed opinions even in these groups, or in this group. But I think the thing that we're all saying is you've got to test skill sets, both practical in the weeds skill sets as well as high level first principle strategic thinking. And there's lots of ways to go about doing that, but like pay people for their time if needed, be careful about making it work that you might use, all of those things. I think but don't not do it, because I have been like ready to hire someone and then like seen a writing sample and been like, whoa, I've been duped. And it doesn't mean that person won't thrive somewhere else or like that their career is doomed, but just not a fit for the style of writing that is needed, or not a fit for the level of data analysis that we need. So the last thing I want to say on this is I think that a 30-60-90 is a terrible assignment. I think it's way too broad. To do a 30-60-90, you have to have so much information on the business that it's just a bad assignment. So more concrete, potentially giving some information up front and saying, pull out 3 ideas from this. And then the other last tip I have here is just, unless this person's primary job is going to be designing things or making decks, not as a designer, but just even as someone that's making, well-designed content themselves, don't have them make a deck, because it takes so much time. And like a doc with bullets or something and then a discussion can just save time on that, because unless you're testing their deck making abilities or testing their ability to design and present information, which for some content roles you certainly are. And Grace is making a face because she loves making decks, and so does Jenny. We have two of the 4 co-hosts on Dear Marketers. I actually like making them too. Devon, do you like making decks?
Recently got out after 3 years
Oh.
at Cocoon that I like making decks.
Yes.
2 weeks ago, the secret got out, and it's been
Well, my
pretty
former
transactions.
manager, the former COO at Asana, when I said I liked making decks, he said, never be good at a bad job. Don't tell people, because they're just going to say, make decks, make decks, make decks. And I think that advice is hilarious.
I hit it for 3 years.
You got to hide
I
it,
do like
actually.
making decks, and I do really appreciate a good deck, but I
I love
totally
a good
agree that is a great way to have people spend way more time than they should on the assignment, and you're not really getting the
Yep.
signal that you need.
Thanks to our partner, Framer. Framer is a no-code website builder for projects and startups of any size. Over the past few years, there have been huge leaps forward in the ease of designing, building, launching, and optimizing websites without needing developer help. This is great news for marketers, and Framer makes this process even easier, and it's overtaken Webflow as my favorite way to build sites, which is a huge deal if you've read my newsletters in the past. Framer looks and feels like a design tool and has a much lower learning curve, so marketers can build pages and launch sites really easily. Give it a try for your next landing page or migrate your whole site over to Framer. You won't look back. Use code MKT1 to get 25% off a basic, pro, startup, or scale-up yearly site. All right, we've been talking a lot about interviewing, about assignments. Let's get into, I'm going to ask you some interview questions, and I want you to tell me, would you ask this a question? Is it a good question? All right, so let's use this to just kind of get through our favorite interview questions. So let's do it. You all can ask me questions too. So I'll ask you guys a question. You tell me if it's good or not. You'll ask me one. It'll be fun. Let's do it. All right, so do you like this question? Would you ask it? What are your quarterly goals right now at your current job?
Depends on the level, if I'd ask it. Like lower level, yeah. Higher level, actually, probably not. Because I'd want to know how they were set and who set them and how much control they had over it. And at a higher level, it feels like way too basic to be.
So what's a better question?
How do you think about like planning your OKRs?
Yeah. How do you set goals?
Yeah.
And what are they? Is a better version, I think, of that question. All right, Grace, hit me with one.
What marketing tool are you using a lot right now? What would you change about it?
I like this one. I think this one depends a little on the role, right? Not every marketing role uses a lot of tools and technologies. Arguably, I
But
guess
maybe
every
they
marketing
should.
role. But maybe they
And they
should.
will,
exactly.
and they do, and it's changing.
And
you
they
have
will,
to,
and they
that's
do,
how
and
this
it's
is
okay
changing.
also if it's like Figma or something like that too, I think. And the reason I like it too, actually, especially for PMMs who are probably less using MarTech in the traditional sense than other roles, I still like it because it's like, are you keeping up to speed with kind of the new
Yes.
technology at
That's the point of
hand?
it, right? It's not the tool that they choose.
Well-
it's the point. Well,
But no,
oh,
Yeah,
I
it's
think
not the tool
Devon,
that they
your
choose,
teams
but the
do this
second
really
part of
well.
what you would add to it, I think, is is part of the assessment because you get a sense of their product sense too, right? And do they think about the way that products are built and the way that products are used?
Yes.
And for a PMM especially, I think even just what's your favorite product and software product or app on your phone or something, and how would you improve it, I think can be a great question for PMMs.
I think it's better though to just like narrow to make it a MarTech tool. I think especially now, like if we're thinking about what's evolved in hiring since, you know, I was in-house or even like the last couple of years, like what's evolved is like everybody has got to be up on the modern tools or you're going to get left behind because you're going to be doing things in an efficient way. And so I think this question just is better than it would have been even then. It applies to every role. What I like about this question beyond just getting people's opinions on what they're using, one, you're going to learn about new tools. And something I often say is like, even if you have a terrible interview, it's like a terrible first date. If you can like learn something or learn about a new tool or get a new perspective on the world or like, you know, discover something, then it's not like a waste of time. So this is like a good question where everybody wins if it, you know, because you get a tool maybe that you haven't thought of. But the other reason I love this question is the point about what would you change about it? Because anyone can sit there and tell you a great tool or tell you a tool that they've heard about. But if you ask them, what would you change about it? Or how would you make it better? Or what's something I might not know in that tool? That's if it's like a HubSpot or something, that really shows that they're actually using it. They're actually thinking about it. And they have a knack for like learning and thinking about these things, which is valuable across content, across growth and demand gen, across product marketing, across design. So love this question. Ask it every time.
The other reason I think it's a good one specifically for like B2B SaaS marketing is there are lots of traditional B2B marketers out there. And when you are building a team that is focused on a more like, I don't know, what word we want to use, modern, progressive, they all sound stupid, but like
cutting edge,
right? But like a more evolved sense of B2B marketing. When that's the team you're building, a question like this helps suss out how this person is approaching B2B marketing, because depending on the length of someone's career, those habits of traditional B2B marketing of white papers and sponsoring, you know, CHRO one-on-one conversations and things like that can be hard to shake out of someone. And so the more you can suss that out, the better.
I think the point here is like, I like questions that both have like a high level part, like a strategic part, and then a very specific, like scrappy in the weeds part, because almost always I'm looking to hire people that are both scrappy and strategic. Sometimes you'll want them to index more on the strategic side. And sometimes I want to hire people that are more on the scrappy side or more on the strategic side, but always I want them to have both skill sets. So if you can get like one question that gets at both, it's a great question. Like the campaign question, similar. You want them to describe the strategy and then you want to drill down and have them get into the details. So that's kind of how I'm thinking about this at a high level. Devon, what's a question that you want to throw out to the group?
This is a gimme for you all because I know we love this question, but one of my favorites is think of something that complicated that you know a lot about and explain it to me as simply as possible. And this is an Emily Kramer original. I got asked this question when you interviewed me for the very first time. And the kicker is you have them explain it as simply as possible. And then you say, okay, now more simply. And
now more
simply.
Say
maybe
now
more
7
simply.
times.
It depends on how uncomfortable you want to make the person, how many times you repeat the ask. But yeah, basically kind of push them to really, really synthesize a value prop or explain something in the simplest terms possible and see how
I
they
like
do
to do
with
this
that.
at the end of the interview. At the beginning of the interview, it's mean and throws people off. But when they're like a little bit comfortable and know that you're fine. The other reason I like it is because I tell people they don't have to pick something tech related. Like I had someone describe to me once how you do like an Indian tea service. Like, I don't know if that's what they call it in India. I don't remember, but like there's some specific process. But Devon took this question and gave me the most business answer ever. And it's hilarious. And I still remember it. This is from like 10 years ago. She answered about the Microsoft org chart and acronyms because she had worked at Yammer, which got acquired by Microsoft. And but like It was
I did
so
not think I did
boring.
well on this question, by the way. I was like shocked that I
Oh,
got
I
an offer because I was
botched
like,
this
man, I really
question.
flubbed
What'd you
that
pick,
one.
Grace? I don't remember what you picked. I remember what Devon picked.
This was at Carta that I was at. I wasn't asked this question at Asana because it was a growth role.
It was a
Uh,
little more junior. Yeah.
At Asana, I was asked this question, and to my
You mean
in
at
my
Carta?
defense,
At
I
Carta.
had been at Carta, yeah. In my defense, I had been not working for 9 months. I was really off my game. And I talked about macrame, which to this
Oh
day,
yeah.
I think about how embarrassing that is. Occasionally, it just like pops into my head, and I'm mortified.
Why is it embarrassing?
Because it's not complicated at all.
I mean, I'm not a
Because here's the thing:
macrameist.
when I wasn't working for 9 months, that is how I was spending my time. I was
Here's the
doing
thing.
little
I have
arts and
asked
crafts.
this. I have asked this. I said, here's the thing, and I'm not going to disagree with you. This is just, here's the thing. I have asked this question of almost every candidate I've interviewed, mainly for product marketing, like fuel roles, content roles, because I want to see if they can describe things, but also I want to learn something about them, and it's a good way to do both, and it's kind of fun at the end, and it's kind of fun for me. It's fun to say, make it simpler, all of these things. And I wish at the start I had written down everyone's answer, because it just would have been fascinating, because it's been so across the board. And then I thought of this like midway through, probably asking the question, and I was like, it's too late now, but it wasn't too late, and I have regrets. So maybe I should do something where if I've ever asked you this question in the world, I want to, because you probably remember what your answer was, because it's kind of an oddball question. But I've never had to answer the question. And so I have thought so much when people are answering before I ask the question after, what would I say? So any other questions you all like to ask in interviews that you want to test around here with us?
Yeah, I think one I really like is to ask folks to walk me through the marketing funnel and the marketing to sales handoff in their current role.
Are people good at that?
I mean, I think it varies immensely.
Yeah.
I think it's super telling, right? And you can also, in best case, they'll tell you their opinion on if this is even the right marketing funnel, if there's something else they wish they could do, should do, where things are falling out, etc. So it's almost just like it's an invitation for them to talk to you about their whole marketing and their perspective on it.
I think it's a really solid question, and I've asked some variations of it in the past for a marketing ops role, I guess, obviously, even growth marketing roles. I think it's a hilarious question to ask a content person, and that means I think you probably should. Not picking on content people, but for some roles, you're just going to be like, it's really going to ruin the interview.
Yeah, but I think like for any role, right, if you get that question and you are deer in headlights,
Yeah.
you don't need to be every role doesn't need to be able to talk through the data and conversion rates, and they come in as a lead, and then
And
like,
we stamp it with this in Salesforce or
not
HubSpot
everyone
or whatever.
needs to talk you through the ops, but like a content person needs to understand how content is impacting every part of the funnel, including the sales handoff, right? And how content plays a role in it. Because if people aren't thinking about how does my work move a prospect customer forward, then they're not thinking about their work in the context of marketing goals.
Yep, I agree with that. Debs?
Yeah, another one somewhat related. That question is sort of related to the goals and OKR's question too, right? Because it's kind of like, what metrics do you care about and why? I think another one that I find interesting sometimes is just ask people where most of their traffic or leads or qualified opportunities come from today. Even if they are not in a growth or demand gen role, especially if they are, because they might be very siloed within their channel and actually not really even understand like what are the big things that are really driving the business today. Similarly, like what segments are driving the most growth in your business today? Those are great PMM questions. How well do they understand their audience and their business today?
Slice and dice it by anything. Like, what's the driver from this segment? What's the biggest driver of this? And you should be able to get an answer.
And they don't have to know exact percentages or like whatever, but it's, do they think about these things? Have they ever tried to understand that about their own business, right? Again, it's you're getting at their like curiosity and their mindset around problem solving, which should be broader than any like specific role that they sit in today.
One of the things about asking the biggest driver of pipeline or whatever it might be is that not only do you see if they know, but also I think that one of the most important things you can do when hiring is make sure you have a similar business model and go-to-market motion, because the marketing function and specific roles in marketing vary so much by if it's self-serve, if it's enterprise, if you're targeting, prosumers, if you're targeting $100,000 deals, if it's just so different across every role. So it also tells you, even if you might think from the outside that company is a great place to pull marketers from, it might reveal that it really isn't, or that you need to ask more questions to make sure that they're adaptable to whatever your business model and go-to-market motion are. So again, it serves two purposes. We didn't touch on reference calls in this conversation, and honestly, I didn't even think to do it. Well, actually, I think I have something to say about it. This actually might be a good segue into so here are some of the questions we asked. We covered that, but let's segue into, you've made an offer. What do you do to sell the person? And I think the best use of reference calls actually is to sell the person that you're trying to hire. You're using the reference to indirectly sell the person, because they probably are going to listen to their reference. And so if you can, not lie, but if you can get the reference excited about the role for them too, that's only going to help you. I think the other really big valuable thing about a reference call is just knowing how to set them up for success, or, finding any major things that are different from what you thought around strengths and stuff. But really, I think that reference calls are most valuable for selling and for helping you onboard. But I don't know if you all differ on that, or love the reference call, or whatever it might be.
No, I love that take. I actually, I think a spicy take. I'm not sure if I totally buy this, but it's reference calls are useless essentially, especially if the reference is given to you by the candidate. Maybe back channels, slightly different thing. But I agree. I think they can be useful in terms of what is this person actually really, really best at, right? Frankly, only really frame things in the positive, because that's how the reference is going to want to frame them anyway. What can I do as their future manager to set them up for success, etc. And then I love your idea of selling them, right? Every time I've done a reference call for someone, I'm in touch with them almost immediately afterwards to be it was great. Your future new boss sounds cool, or something, there's always a touch point after the fact, I think, between the candidate and their reference. So I think that's a really good point, that's your opportunity to have someone else tell them that this sounds like a good job for them. Yeah.
Especially depending on who it is and what their experience is, or if they have more or less experience or whatever it is, it can be useful for that. I do a lot of reference calls. I've done some reference calls for you too as well. And I do report back immediately. If I'm ooh, I'm just feeling this is really disorganized, you're biting off more than anyone can chew here, or whatever it may be. So think about that in the reference call. But yeah, what else do you do to sell a candidate? And I kind of hate the word sell, because I hate it because you're still, even though you've made an offer, and I think some people say once you've made an offer, you're all in and you're committed and you should do whatever it takes to close it. And I don't know that I buy that, because I think you should have to do some selling and get them excited, but I think you're still making sure it's a complementary fit. And I think there are things that candidates can do in that offer to close process that are huge red flags. And so I don't think it's just sell. And I think some people approach it that the offer's out, do whatever it takes. You've made the decision. And I think you're learning all the way through.
Well, yeah. Well, and also on the flip side, you should also be selling the candidate from the first call.
Yes.
In addition, right? The interview process is should be a mutual evaluation, which again, back to why I like to do the workshop sort of case so much, is part of it is to give that person an idea of my working style.
Yeah.
And if they're oh, this is not for me, then they can opt out, because I'm probably not going to change my working style that much for an individual person on my team. Right. So I think that it helps sell throughout the process to show this is a team I want to be a part of, right? Every conversation is building for that person. Oh, I really want to be on this team because they have their shit together. Am I allowed to say shit?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Great. Okay.
I'm the censor of this podcast, so I'll let you do with that what you will.
Thank you very much. I think I can learn something from this team, whatever it is, throughout the whole process. And I think the other the other piece I really focus on when it does come to that end part of maybe the even more focus on selling, even if it is still a back and forth, is people don't work at companies for their whole careers. People especially don't work at startups for their whole careers. And so the thing I always try to do is make sure this person knows that if I'm hiring them, it's because I'm invested in them and their growth and their career. And I want them to have a really incredible career defining experience on my team that gets them to the next step. And I'm here to help them do that, not just to have them fill a seat to accomplish a job to hit, a KPI.
I think that's a really great point that I haven't heard said exactly that way before, which is like, obviously people have shorter tenures and we talk about that, but hey, nobody expects this to be like a 10, 15-year thing. That's just not realistic. And like, I think it's important to remember that on all sides. Like, people do fill roles at a certain point and then they do move on, and there's benefits to moving on. And I think it's valuable to know too, if you get like laid off or fired or whatever the case may be, rift, all of those things, but it doesn't mean your career is over or your career is not going anywhere. And I think similarly, as a hiring manager, I used to take it pretty, seriously if I hired someone that was the wrong fit and kind of like replay over and over in my mind what went wrong. And I think you can do that, but I think you also have to realize that like sometimes it just doesn't work out. And there's people that I've had on teams in the past where, maybe their tenure hasn't been as long as either of us wanted on either sides, but like we remain in touch and I've referred them to things in the future or whatever it might be. And so I think it's just a good point in general. Like, this isn't a family, all of those things that I think there's startup myths, like you're joining forever. And so I think hitching yourself to a great manager or a great employee that can like be with you for your career, case in point, we've all known each other for a long time. We've all helped each other in our careers and our worlds. And like, that's like what you can strive for in terms of both hiring and being hired, right?
Yeah, and
well
it's
said.
definitely about mutual fit. Like you said, even if you feel like you're in selling mode, like it is a two-way street. I think the big thing too is just as much transparency as possible, right? In terms of what is the day-to-day going to look like? What are the priorities? How might this role change over time too, right? What is the shape of the role today? What do I think it might look like in 6 to 12 months? And just be as honest and forthcoming as possible. Because I think that usually makes people feel like a high level of trust and excitement to work for you and makes them more likely to accept. And also it makes it less likely that you'll end up with misaligned expectations or a bad fit on either end. Specifically, I think when it comes to equity compensation, and I know all of us share this belief, be as transparent as your company will allow you to be in terms of their equity compensation and what that is worth today, could be worth in the future, will cost them to actually obtain in the case of options, etc.
Yeah. I think being like my thing for hiring, and I think it served me well, because look, I'm talking to you both still, is just like, I think the authenticity matters so much, and just like being a human, because as Grace said, they're going to have to work with you as a human, not as like this polished salesperson. And maybe this leads us into my next question, which is, where have you gone wrong in this process as a hiring manager, or as someone managing and building a great team, to Branka's question?
Actually, this is one sort of related to assignments, because I suspect, the assignment could have been misleading on this one. I've made mistakes before on like speed to execute. I've made mistakes before on checking for speed to execution, like basically hired someone who couldn't move quickly enough for the pace of a startup, essentially. And I suspect, Grace, to your point on assignments, this is the kind of candidate who spent 10 hours on an assignment that I asked them to spend 2 hours on. And I think it's a really hard thing to test for, is like, how quickly can they just get things done, basically.
Yeah, that's why, I'm trying to think if there's like a good question to get at that. Sometimes when I just ask that very basic question of walk me through a campaign or project, I say, what was the time horizon? And I've honestly been flabbergasted by the answers to some of those questions. They're like, I did this, I put out this video, and they're like, it took 4 months. And I'm like, what?
You're like, what?
So asking time horizons on things can be like super, super valuable, just as far as like, what are the types of teams they've operated on. And I think the larger the company they've come from, the more you have to test for that, right? And figure it out. And so, there's this other myth, and this isn't necessarily mistakes, but it made me think of this, or what I think is a myth is that the interview process should be exactly the same for everyone. I understand that to try to have like a fair assessment, it should be similar, but I do think there's different questions you're going to ask different people based on their background. And I think it's false to assume that you're going to follow a script. I think actually the same goes for how you do marketing. It's false to assume you're going to follow a script or go through a set of things. And I think you have to be adaptive. And yeah, maybe there's some core questions you want to ask everyone. Maybe there's a scorecard that's standard, and I think that's what should be standard, but you need to ask different questions for different people. And I think just following a script, first of all, makes for a terrible interview experience for the people you're trying to hire. And then also, I think it really doesn't serve you in assessing if they're going to be a great fit.
Yeah, I think also to Grace's earlier point about making it seem like you're in a meeting together, you want to respond to their answers, right? You don't read from a script because obviously you're going to want to dig deeper on certain areas, or if they tell you about something that sparks another question, I think it's very important to keep the conversation naturally flowing like that, because again, that's what it's going to be like to work together. It's not going to be one person asking the other person a list of questions. And having them
interviewing
answer.
isn't a quiz. It's a conversation. And so like make sure that you're actually having a conversation.
Yeah, make it like a meeting. It's good advice. Any other big mistakes you've made in the process?
We've talked about, right, like hiring people that can learn and adapt quickly, and, having a very specific background isn't always important. And I've always taken that mindset. And at times I've been overly optimistic about one, maybe a person's potential, but even more so about my ability to foster that potential at that particular time, right? Hiring people with a ton of potential is great, but if there isn't someone with the time and ability to coach them to get them to that next level, they're not going to get there. It's a very small percentage of people that are going to just be thrown in the chaotic situation and swim and figure it out with no guidance. And that person is a super, super, superstar, and you should hire them. But there are many more people with great potential with the right support. And if you can't give them that support, they're still not the right candidate.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I see startups make this mistake all the time, especially founders hiring marketers, where they're like, oh, they don't have a lot of experience, but they cost less and they seem really scrappy. And I think they can figure this out. And they're like a creator on YouTube, so they can do marketing.
Oh, no.
And like maybe they could be amazing and maybe they have some of those skill sets, but like you're gonna need to teach, like if I used to use this concept a lot. I haven't thought about this in a while, where I would say there's too many firsts. You all probably remember me saying this. So there's just too many firsts. Like first time working in a company, first time in this business model, first time in this role. Count how many firsts there are. And there's definitely a too many. You need fewer firsts than whatever the opposite is.
You can't make a whole marketing plan with only Krameworks.
Yeah. So that's the lesson.
But I also think the other piece is, as the marketing leader, right, that your team and the excellence of your team ultimately is what reflects on you.
Mm-hmm.
So if you want to look really good, hire the absolute best people, especially if they're better than you, because at the end of the day, they're just going to make you look that much more amazing at your job.
But to wrap it up, just because they were a superstar somewhere else, or someone else, the company said they're a superstar somewhere else, does not mean they're going to be a superstar for you, because marketing is not a playbook sport.
Correct.
Something like that. Marketing is bespoke. Like you have to go from first principles thinking, and that's what you have to be great at and be able to place those strategic bets. And just because you were along for the ride or did that really well somewhere else does not mean you're going to fit on the great team that's being built. So I think that's the big thing. So hopefully this covers Branka's question on, what are some things that she might not have thought of, even though she's hired hundreds of people to build a great marketing team. And I think building a great marketing team has lots of parallels with building other great teams. But I think, as I just said, it's also pretty specific to marketing. And so, I think there's lots of education you have to do for founders, executives, and recruiters when you're hiring on the marketing side. So don't forget that piece as well. Thanks to our partner, Mutiny. The lines between marketing and sales are blurring. and it's more critical than ever to get aligned with your sales team and work together to break into enterprise accounts. But even the greatest marketing and sales teams struggle to collaborate, including me in the past. So you're not alone if you secretly hope your sales team gets replaced. According to Mutiny's new State of Marketing and Sales Alignment report, 80% of sales and marketers actually fantasize about replacing their counterparts, but maybe not for the reason you think. While marketing and sales do feel aligned on overall goals and objectives, the disconnect comes when they try to work together day to day. Mutiny gets it. They want to help you make this relationship better. So check out their new report at mutinyhq.com/report. That's mutinyhq.com/report. Or use their product to make ABM personalization easier. Now it's time for Best Marketer, where I quiz my co-hosts. This is just a silly way to end. And the game today, and I'll pick a winner. The game today, tell me the most ridiculous power move you could do coming into an interview, either as the interview host or the interviewee, and it can be ridiculous and something you shouldn't do. Just tell me a ridiculous idea.
Some people might not think this is ridiculous. I think I have heard that, folks will just leave the interview after like 10 minutes if they really don't think it's a fit.
Oh my God.
I find that a little extreme. I think, if you've booked 30 minutes of the person's time, give them at least the vast majority
of
at
least 26, at least
those 30 minutes. So yeah, I would say just like standing up and walking out, or like ending the Zoom early. Pretty aggressive power move that I myself do not employ.
Not to interrupt our rapid fire game, but do you all have things like, if you know in 10 minutes that an interview is going bad, are there things that you do differently besides walking out of the room, which I hope you don't do?
I switch it to being like, well, let's talk about what questions you have. And I switch it to them asking me questions because I can talk forever, which is why I'm here.
This is why we're here.
You give me an opening, yes, no question, I will talk for 20 minutes.
I think we all have that in common. I try to switch it around to learning how they do marketing at their company without violating any like privacy NDA things or making them say things they shouldn't. But I'm like, oh, there's got to be something I can learn from how this company does things, whether they're doing it terribly or doing it great. So I switch it to like a learning experience. Grace, what do you got? Power move. Interview power move.
The one I've always wanted to do but never will is to show up with a full glass of milk and just see if they say something.
This is the second time in 3 episodes that we've talked about milk unplanned. Which is just strange.
Nothing more unnerving than an adult drinking 16 ounces of milk in a clear glass.
What if it's almond milk?
Even worse because you're not getting meaningful nutritional value.
Oh no, this has taken a different turn. This is a different podcast now. This is not a wellness podcast, Grace. I've tried to remind you multiple times.
I'm pro dairy. I'm not pro 16 ounces.
Drink a latte, the adult cup of milk, like the rest of us.
Right. I like my milk steamed with caffeine, shots of coffee in it, please.
I have a couple other. So I like your answers. I'm not sure there's a winner because I think I can one-up both of you, quite honestly. Okay, I have 2 suggestions, and then we can pick an overall winning answer. Bringing a cat to an in-person interview. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Because I've seen that done. You've seen that done? Yeah. I've seen
a carrier on a leash?
No. I don't remember if they were in a carrier or not, but I have seen someone have in an in-person interview at a place where we all worked, I have seen someone bring a cat into an interview, an engineering interview. Yeah.
The interviewer, the person who worked at that company. Yes.
I've seen it happen. Okay. The next one, the second one I have is my bar for interviewing candidates is always that I learn something new. So I used to think that a good question to do would just be to walk in, first question, teach me something as a power move. Like, just throw that out there. And I've never actually done it, but I aspire to.
I feel like I would start shaking.
I would start shaking asking. I'd feel like so nervous to be like that cutthroat, I think. But I couldn't pull it off now because I feel like most people would know that that's like, it would be a joke if I were to do it now. But
you should do a podcast called Teach Me Something, where you just get on and you say, teach me something. And then the person teaches you something.
That's an awful
great
idea.
Spin-off.
What a spin-off. Dear marketers and teach me something.
I like it.
Adding
Thanks,
to
Grace.
the Market One podcast
I like
portfolio.
the idea that you
So
could
we
have
have-
different
It's a little
marketers
bit,
on that
it's
are
too
better
similar
at you
to
and
stuff you should know. Is that what it's called?
Yeah, but
This-
marketing.
This is the part of the podcast where they start playing the music when they're editing it. Anyway, that's all we have. Big thanks to Devon and Grace for talking with me about building amazing teams. And another thanks to them for being amazing people to have on my team 3 times now at Asana, at Carta, and now for Dear Marketers. And thanks for listening. See you on the next episode.